Hello and welcome back to the UK Medical Freedom Alliance. My name is Ian Humphreys and today I'm going to be talking to Alex Kriel. Alex Kriel, of course, is known as Thinking Slow from the Thinking Coalition, or Think Slow Coalition. The Thinking Coalition describes itself as an unincorporated group of individuals who are pro-liberty and anti-totalitarianism, concerned about the overreach of Anglosphere governments in a number of areas, including, and what's close to our heart, public health, also censorship of free speech, which is also close to our hearts as we've had some videos taken down, and family life, something else, of course, extremely close to our hearts, hence wanting to speak to them. Much of the work of the Thinking Coalition really sprang from the COVID response in April 2020 when they suspected the coronavirus outbreak had been hijacked to implement an altogether different agenda. Their findings and presentations are not idle guesswork, but rather the result of extensive and ongoing research running into thousands of hours. Every piece of work they do is referenced to credible external sources, and readers can make up their own minds about the credibility of their conclusions. So I think this is going to be a very, very interesting conversation. And without further ado, let's go and talk to Alex. Welcome to another broadcast by the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, the UK's most recognised and respected organisation advocating for every individual's right to informed consent, bodily autonomy and medical choice. We are the UK's voice of ethical medicine. Well, hi Alex, thank you so much for coming on to UKMFA TV. It's a real honour to have you. As you probably know, we've been following you for quite some time. And it's a real honour to have you join us on our podcast. And I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. So thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I really like the work you guys do. I think we're very closely aligned, 100% on a lot of issues. So,
absolutely. And you very kindly mentioned us alongside Heart and other organisations, and David Curtin's party and TechCong's party, which again, they're all people that we work with, regularly. So we know these people, and it's a nice feeling to know that we have at least got a group of people that are aligned, as you say.
Yeah, and I think the problem for all of us is we don't get really any traction, and I think that's quite deliberate. That's why I keep saying, look, there's actually a lot of people out there doing a lot of good work that you never hear about. And the fact you don't hear about them is deliberate. It's not by accident.
Well, no, and I mean, we can talk about this later anyway, because I'm sure you've got lots to say about that. But we've had videos pulled down, certainly off of YouTube, and the content is no different to certain others. They're talking about the same things in the same way, and yet for some reason their content stays up and ours gets taken down. So we do suspect that there is a targeting of, I don't know, maybe it's Liz, and as you know, Liz Evans, maybe it's her name that's already been sort of underlined as someone that needs to be silenced a bit, or it could be UKMFA generally. I don't know, but I'm sure maybe similar things have happened to you and others too. So yeah, it's a bit of a battle, and especially when you can't really work out why the video's been taken down. We had one that was actually, Liz was talking at David Curtin's party conference, and she got to it indicated something like 35 minutes there was some breach of YouTube's regulations, whatever they call them. And there was nothing there. I went to that point in the video. This literally, thank you very much, good night. That's about all it was. So it's a very, very odd circumstances.
Yeah, well, I think it's all deliberately vague, and like you said, you never know what you've actually done. It's always kind of vaguely expressed, breach of community guidelines, what exactly you've done, and no chance of editing. The thing's just wiped out. That's it. So,
there's no appeal process. They say there is, but there's nothing really happens. They just say, no, you're still banned, and that's it. So yeah. Go somewhere else, which obviously we have done. So like you, we're on Rumble and other channels, and audio podcasts seem to stay up perfectly fine, strangely enough. So that's good. Anyway, perhaps just in case we've got people here that don't know you, I doubt that's the case, but we never know. You kind of started this coalition of yours, the Thinking Coalition, in 2020. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I like many of us, I guess, fell into this kind of dissident area that we hadn't really planned on getting involved in. But, I kind of realized early on that the modeling was wrong. And, I also got the feeling through some discussions that a lot of people knew it was wrong. And it was kind of almost like it was meant to be wrong. So the people I spoke to said, look, the only way anyone is going to listen to any of this is if you put it up on social media. And we tried to get things published, and nothing was published in the scientific journals. So I did start this social media account, and then over time, you know what it's like. You're battling this juggernaut that just keeps moving in its own direction. And then I just asked for volunteers, so we just built a group up, and it's kind of all backgrounds involved in the group. It was kind of heavy into numbers early on, so there were 3 physicists in the group, but now it's become more general and people come and go. So it's very much just people who feel the government has overstepped the mark, and that's the only real qualification that we have. So we have firemen, we have nurses, dentists, et cetera, et cetera. It's quite kind of a mix now.
That's good though, isn't it? Because having a bit of a broad church is useful, because you've got the different expertise coming in from different directions, and it's a little bit like us. Although we are a medical organisation, if you like. I come from a policing background. I've got and also IT and program management. I had no medical background at all, but UKMFA needed some kind of almost like business experience behind them. So I came originally to do that, and I foolishly suggested that maybe a podcast would be a good idea. And but then they said, well, if you're going to do a podcast, off you go then. So this is where we are. But it's been successful because it helps with the outreach. But yeah, we've got copywriters, we've got dentists, and but could even be the same dentist for all I know. I mean, I think sometimes we cross-pollinate without actually realizing sometimes. But yeah. So what was it about the modeling that alerted you originally?
Well, I mean, initially it was the Diamond Princess data that I just got hold of in my old job, and I could see it was nothing like the fatality ratio that Ferguson had in his model. It was 5 or 8 times out, and that soon became real world data when you could see that the hospitals weren't full, they were empty essentially in April 2020 in the UK. That's another official statistic. So by April 2020, this model is completely wrong. And as I kind of hinted at, I had some offline discussions with some people who had worked on the foot and mouth situation, and it was the same playbook. It was go in, create a crazy exaggerated model, sort of grab control and implement draconian policies. So this felt like an action replay of the whole foot and mouth scandal that also then just petered out at the end. So it felt like the same playbook, and also going back through the history of these models, they were almost all wrong and always massively exaggerated. So this was nothing new in that sense. This was the same again.
I think it's like some of the data that was coming down from the ONS as well was very strange. I found I ended up doing my own analysis.
They created this whole new category of, I think they called it deaths involving COVID. So, I mean, literally for hundreds of years, you had this very clear split in deaths. So, you had part 1 of a death certificate and part 2. And it was always part 1 is the causality. Those are the chain of events leading to death is part 1. And part 2 was essentially comorbidities. And the ONS just said, no, we're going to have a completely new category called deaths involving COVID, where we add up parts 1 and 2. So if COVID is mentioned anywhere in the death certificate, that becomes a death involving COVID. And you're right, someone is actually inventing this new categories that are completely at odds with everything we've ever done in history. And you're also starting to wonder, well, why is that? Of course, it generates a big number. And then, much further down the line, you start getting into actually a breakdown between parts 1 and part 2. So, yeah, you're right. There were these completely weird statistics that we just invented for this situation. It's completely bizarre.
And they had a row which they called, I think, respiratory illnesses or something like that. And then almost immediately in March 2020, another row, as you say, suddenly arrived on the spreadsheet. But the respiratory diseases, deaths, they disappeared. And they were the same numbers, just in a different row, but under a different label. I think that was maybe their early attempt at it, and because I'm sure they refined it after that and made a lot of changes to hide, I think, what they'd actually done. But as a former police officer, I wouldn't let that go. That became a bit of a bone, which I wouldn't let go. There was something seriously wrong with that.
Yeah.
So after that, so that was really your entry into this minefield, which became, looking at governments and science and medical matters and ethics, and because your remit now has got so wide, hasn't it? So it's
it just keeps getting bigger, really. And I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago, and a guy made quite a good point that actually there's almost no consequences for politicians for lying. And you sort of look at it and you look at, other than very extreme cases of defamation, there are no consequences. So all these endless lies people just get away with. And it's just become, it's called a post-truth world, isn't it? But almost anything you look at, it's the very best you could say about it is it's simplified to such an extent that it's misleading. But most of it is just outright lies, essentially. So, and as you said, you can chase your tail all day pointing out lies. I don't know if it does any good, but it's everything you look at, it's not the way it's presented.
No, and I think it becomes exhausting. I think actually the more you look into it, the less time you have, and to look at each individual element. And I do feel personally, and it's a well worn out phrase, but it's exactly how I feel, was that my world has been literally turned upside down, and everything I thought was true actually isn't. And hands up, I was caught out at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, in inverted commas. That did catch me out. I think I wasn't concentrating. I was doing other things, and you're just thinking about family and friends, and and this propaganda. The strength of that propaganda was very well done, I think, and I think a lot of people felt.
That's also things we knew fairly early on as well. The minutes of that meeting of the SPI-B, the SAGE subgroup that does behavioral psychology, where we knew reasonably early on they were weaponizing fear, and they said, to increase compliance, use fear. And that was quite a big thing, because you start looking at the political views then of the people giving that advice, and they were all very far left academics. And I actually read some of the documents these guys produced in their day jobs as professors of psychology, and they're all into collectivization and stamping out the individual, and you start to realize that actually there's a whole big political agenda going on here, as well as using fear. I think everybody it's a sensible thing to do, to be frightened when your government's telling you this is Armageddon. Everybody, including me, I don't have a problem saying, early on, you're just like, wow, this is really serious. Of course, we trusted our governments for decades, and funnily enough, it was the people in East Europe who were much more skeptical because they understood governments can get far out of control.
Yeah.
And all of us, including me, were a little bit naive that we trusted the government early on. But that soon, sort of when the numbers started falling apart, but the narrative continued, that's when I realized, okay, there's something else going on here.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it wasn't long before a lot of us actually changed our thinking and could see that there was something seriously wrong with not only what they were saying, but the way they were behaving. And the idea of locking down people for that amount of time and getting people to wear masks for a virus it very soon became nonsensical. And the famous virus that can't do anything to you whilst you're walking from the restaurant door to a table, but all that sort of stuff. Keep your mask on, but you can take it off whilst you're eating because the virus knows exactly now you're eating. We can leave you alone. We won't infect you, and we'll only get you when you're on the way out again. And people just believe that.
I mean, as you said, if you looked up anything, how we used to deal with pandemics, all those documents were out there. The old pandemic response plans, and we did literally the opposite of all of that advice. Everything was inverted, and you realize, well, were these guys seriously wrong for hundreds of years of cumulative wisdom to say, for example, don't lock down? Were they all wrong all those hundreds of years? And now we suddenly have to do everything completely upside down, and it never made any sense when you started looking at the old, like you said, the advice on masks, the approach to lockdowns, anything. It was always a complete inversion of what we did in the past.
Please consider donating to the UKMFA. We are really grateful for all donations, no matter how small. Your donations enable us to continue to lobby for your right to informed consent and medical freedom to be upheld, and to provide resources to educate and empower the public. There are multiple options for donating. One is that you can scan the QR code that's on this video right now, or you can go to the link that is featured in the description below this video, or you can go onto our website and contribute via donor box, or you can buy us a coffee.
Well, in fact, as kids, if we got ill with the measles or whatever, you would just go and find other kids and infect them to make sure that the natural immunity was spread around and you all got over it and then got on with your lives, and I couldn't see that this was any different at the time. And unless it was a major biological weapon and it was going to wipe us all out, but of course it didn't do that. So it can't have been that either, really. Certainly, if it was, it wasn't very effective. So in your studies, why do you think doctors reacted the way they reacted? Because doctors used to be quite independent in thinking, and they used to know you as well. They knew you personally. They knew your family. They knew your kids. But all of a sudden that stopped as well, and everyone got treated the same. There was no discernment between one or another. It was all, let's just jab everybody. Doesn't matter what their background is. Doesn't matter what their comorbidities are. Doesn't matter what their medical history is. Let's just go ahead and do it. Why do you think they did that?
That is the $1 million question that I couldn't really answer. I struggle to understand. I mean, other than groupthink is the obvious answer, but you're right. If you remember, this whole thing was right at the beginning. There was, this is just for the vulnerable, for the elderly, and then as over time, it's like, okay, well, now we're going to do the next stage group, and then 7 months later, we're doing children, which so it's again, it's like a salami slice approach to this thing, and the guys that were paying attention, we knew that they had ordered hundreds of millions of doses of this stuff. So it was clear they intended to jab everyone right from the beginning, but it was sold as like, no, this is just for the elderly and the vulnerable. And then you just go down the age groups. I don't know I honestly don't know why doctors didn't say this doesn't make sense. I really just don't know why that happened. Again, I'm sure there was a lot of applied psychology, wasn't it? Because once you'd got the lockdown, then the solution to the lockdown, which they had imposed, was the vaccine. So it was like I likened it to a mafia sales technique. You know, if you don't want your business to be burned down, you pay us protection money.
Right.
But it's the same guys that you're paying protection money who are burning down the business. So it's like, we will release you from lockdown if you take all these vaccines. Well, hang on, you put us into lockdown. How does this work? This coercion.
Sure.
So,
well, I think, as you've mentioned before, you kind of follow the money, don't you? You follow, as you talked about the oligarchy and the way that money flows between them, governments, and businesses. I've got a feeling it's something to do with all of that, the way that all connects, and that this was another one of their plays. Unfortunately, though, it's caused so much devastation. I mean, I've just done 2 podcasts yesterday with people that lost. Well, one lost his wife. Another one is now so sick. You know, he still thinks he's going to die in a very short period of time. You know, even years on, because this spike protein is still working on his body. And it's amazing the lack of morals and lack of ethics that have basically come into play there, because the people that are doing this, whether knowingly or unknowingly, they must see the result of what they've done, but they're not speaking up and doing anything about it.
Yeah, I know we have worked together on this. The worst part of it all was the compulsory vaccination of the care home workers, and you probably know with Liz, we wrote this long letter to all the MPs that voted for this, saying, look, when you guys made this decision, you already had 300,000 adverse reactions. Like, what were you thinking when you were making this compulsory? And you already had the evidence showing it's not getting anywhere close to stopping infection. I mean, we can argue what the infection is and how relevant a PCR test is, but it wasn't stopping positive PCR tests even. So what were you guys thinking when you did this? And we only got one response from one MP who wrote back and said, actually, I very much regret voting for that piece of legislation. Most of the rest ignored it or told us to fly a kite somewhere. That was about it. So you're right. You know, what were these guys thinking? And Liz is right, of course, that the whole point of all of these things like informed consent, that's meant to be a bulwark against this kind of panic. And instead of using it as a bulwark, they just threw it away and cancelled it, which is, I mean, it's completely, I honestly, to this day, I can't imagine how that was allowed to happen.
No, and it's almost like a straw poll in a way, I suppose. I mean, just speaking to individuals, whether I've interviewed them on here or just people that I know, when I've asked them about the process of going into a centre and having that jab, they were not given informed consent at all in any way, which to me is a crime. That must be illegal. But of course, then that brings me on to something else, is the police. When the police have been informed about some of these crimes, and I know they have been because I was involved in one of the presentations of evidence to a police station, they've just turned us away. And that's an interesting response to former police officers, actually, that worked together to compile a case, and literally turned the lights off in the front office and told us to leave. And I have a feeling, actually, that possibly that came right from the top. So each of the chief constables had been told that there's a narrative you need to follow. If anyone comes and starts reporting crimes like this, just tell them it's not a crime and to go away, and to take another route if they want to complain.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of stuff is done on bluff to some extent. A lot of what they did was bluff, because it was all very shaky legal grounds and everything else on a lot of this stuff, and they're just seeing who will actually, like you said, file a complete police complaint, and how far they'll take that, because of course all this stuff is hugely time consuming and expensive if you actually get lawyers involved. And that, I think I think that's kind of one of the few ways to stop this happening again. I know that's something you guys are looking at, is like, how do you prevent this happening again? And I don't think we're even close on that, unfortunately, because it's just these small freedom groups saying this is completely outrageous. It's not enough to stop these guys doing this again and withdrawing informed consent next time round. And, I think we have to, unfortunately, some people are going to have to probably do these long, lengthy, multi-year legal challenges to make this more difficult.
And I suppose a similar problem that you've got, I suppose, is reaching the general public but then when you do, actually getting them to listen and to understand what you're telling them. Because I know Asim Malhotra speaks about this, doesn't he, about the willful blindness that, and people are kind of willfully blind, but that's because they can't handle that famous line, you can't handle the truth. They I don't think they can. And actually, that's as an aside, that's one thing that worries me, that should the truth come out in almost like in a tsunami of information, that people will crumble under the pressure, because the psychology of that could be really hard.
Yeah. I mean, and there is a context as well, to the vaccination. If you actually, and I might do a Substack about this, but if you look at the laws that have been passed in the last 2 years, Online Safety Act, the bits of the Terrorism Act and the Public Order Act, if you start looking at the way those things are being used, it is tyranny. I mean, there's really no two ways about it. The kind of people they're arresting for, the sort of crimes, it's thought crime and wrong speak. I mean, this is what these people are being arrested for. So we are quite far into tyranny, but as you said, a lot of people, they just don't want to see it. And I only really noticed it when I put the table of these laws and when they were passed, and you go, wow, this is clearly going in one direction. Yes. And it's maybe until people get personally affected, they don't really want to think about it. And that's a challenge, that's a problem for us in these little groups.
Yeah, and then it comes to government and how you change your government, and even those that are supposedly going to be our saviours, and I'm not sure about them either. And I know you've spoken about this too, but I just can't see it. And that worries me, that we're only left with people like David Curtin and his party, and Tek Kong and his party, and maybe even UKIP, but none of those I can't see being in government anytime soon. Even if they were to form a coalition, there's just not enough of them.
Yeah. No, I've also abandoned the idea of a sort of great awakening that sweeps through Parliament and gets us a libertarian government. That's probably not going to happen. And the reason it won't happen is because, unfortunately, the people are heavily influenced by these, big ticket, expensive marketing campaigns. So they're called, I don't know what you call them, political campaigns, but it's basically marketing campaign, clever use of social media, and that works. So the people with a lot of money behind them get a lot of votes, and that's already a problem, because they're beholden to the financial interests that are funding them. So I think you're right. There won't be that kind of, and by definition, it won't be a grassroots movement grabbing seats in Parliament. So I think it'll be local little. I kind of equated this to, we have to be like the Finns in the Soviet-Finnish War. A little bit of partisan action in faraway woods somewhere, and that's the way to have some areas of liberty. That I can't see another way, unfortunately, for the time being.
It does feel like that, doesn't it? And even with the new American government, and RFK got sworn in, was it yesterday, I think? I don't know. Have you any hope there?
Well, it's the same story again. I mean, Trump's election campaign cost $1.3 billion. That's sort of official numbers. And, you have to ask yourself, well, who is he more interested in? Is he, if someone comes who provided him part of the $1.3 billion and says, I want X, will he take those interests above the interests of the average MAGA voter? And, that's kind of to be determined, but I'd always assumed he's probably going to be quite heavily focused on his funders. And I mean, Washington always has been. And when you see then these big announcements of we're going to invest hundreds of millions in AI and mRNA technology, you go, well, most of his funders are invested in those sectors. So I'm not surprised. And there's a business called Palantir in the US, which is it's sort of heavily involved in artificial intelligence, and it facilitates autonomous weapon systems, and it facilitates interpretation of databases to try and find patterns. And the share price of that business has doubled, and that's a business that Peter Thiel is heavily invested in, and he's quite close in with those people. So the stock market's telling you this business is going to do very, very well in a Trump administration, and this business does things that most libertarians would find kind of worrying. There's that whole link as well, which is, I think that's quite important, and could be, for me, that's more important than maybe some of the things that the politicians actually say. You look to where the money is, and you think, well, maybe they're going to push this stuff because that's what the stock market's telling you.
Well, I think JD Vance is, he's got shares in the mRNA company, isn't he? Which name escapes me at the moment. And I think Viraswamy has as well.
Kriel, I think it's called Kriel or something, Therapeutics. And another one as well. I can't remember the name.
I suppose if I wanted to be kind and hopeful, I suppose maybe they've got shares in there so they can slow it all down. Maybe they are going to help. I don't know. At the moment, I feel like I'm sitting there with a bucket of popcorn just watching the show because there's not much else we can do other than watch and see how it unfolds, I guess.
Yeah.
I
think maybe warn people again. The thing we can do, though, and we are doing, is to say, look, the way out of this is grassroots, no matter how kind of hopeless it might look sometimes. But ultimately, that is the only way out, is grassroots. If you're waiting for a top-down, well-funded solution to come to you, you've had it, because it's not going to happen. Like, you have to actually get involved in UK Medical Freedom Alliance, in Heritage, and whoever. It doesn't matter, but you have to get involved, because that's the only place you're going to find people interested in personal liberty. The top-down solutions always have an agenda behind them.
Please sign up to receive our newsletter, and you'll be notified of UKMFA campaigns, open letters, calls to action, and any important updates. You can do this on our website at ukmedfreedom.org. That's ukmedfreedom.org.
What's difficult to hear, if you like, David Curtin's spoken about this. He said that finance is dwindling. He's been living off of savings. Yeah. He's got no investors. So unless a major investor comes in, he's even thinking about going back to work and finding something to do. I know you've spoken similarly sometimes about if your finance doesn't pick up, that you too are going to have to think about winding down.
Yeah.
Or certainly it becomes.
I should have stopped doing this years ago if I was sensible.
Well, yeah. I mean, I actually retired in 2018. The idea was that I was going to do music full time. I'm sitting in a room here surrounded by guitars and stuff, actually, and that was what I was going to do. And of course, then the whole thing struck, and everything got locked down. There were no gigs anymore, and I had no clients anymore for mixing and mastering and that kind of stuff. So any income stream just disappeared. And it's never come back, and now so I'm doing this for free too, and it's I'm not pleading poverty because I'm in a good position. I must say I don't have to plead poverty, but it is difficult because we should be getting something, because things aren't free outside. You can't walk into Tesco's and say, well, I'm doing my job for nothing, so can I have a shelf load of stuff for nothing, please? They're just not going to do that. It never works like that. And people don't quite understand that. So I would encourage anybody watching this video, to help you out and help us out, buy some coffees and, send us a few pennies just to help, because you only, if a few hundred people sending you £1, it does help, that's what we need. So, what else I learned to ask you? Yes, of course. So as you know, Liz is a Christian. I can probably call myself a Christian, not quite in the same way, but certainly I'm a believer. I understand you're probably the same.
I'm not probably as good a Christian as I should be, but I try and vaguely follow what's going on there. I do believe it's an important part of society. I think, like maybe a lot of us underestimated possibly how important it is, but I'm certainly beginning to think now it's much more important than I've given it credit for. And I think without some kind of recovery in Christianity, I think we're going to struggle, to be honest.
I think you're right. And my huge disappointment, I think, is the fact that so many churches turned around and became vaccination centres, etc., and they, were helping to perpetuate this lie, I would say, about the pandemic and about the vaccines, etc. So I tend to do everything inward. So I'm not going out to churches, and I might chat to people that here and have but apart from that, it's I'm very disappointed in the way that the church overall has responded. And I know so many good priests and vicars have actually moved on away from the church and gone independent, or found something small somewhere where they can minister. But have you got any thoughts about that, about what happened with the church, or is this all part of the same breakdown across society?
Yeah, I think. I mean, there's always been this joke of the great and the good. This sort of strata of society across academics, media, probably church leaders. It looks like some politicians that just went with the program. So the whole system went with the whole COVID program. And you're right, basically nobody stood up and said, this is kind of wrong. And what you had in the church as well as other places is you had some dissenters like Reverend Franklin. I know he was very clear that this is just totally inexcusable to shut the churches down. And, he was and is very outspoken about that. But you're right, the system as a whole really, I think, abandoned. It's really a fundamental role. And you're right that I just got this feeling that they're also starting to worship the science. I went round Durham Cathedral. It's just full of vaccine propaganda. It's like, no, this is a church. I mean, we're here to pray to God. We're not here to worship the science. I mean, this is really weird. I found it very weird and very, very odd. The whole thing was odd. I didn't like it.
No, and also, it's not just the Christian church either. It's the synagogues didn't stand up to speak out. The mosques, none of them came forward really. And
I think the Hasidic Jews were very much against. They were the only sort of religious group that said no way with the vaccine, and there's all kinds of scuffles and fights with them. As a religious body, I think they were probably, as far as I know, at least the only ones that said, no, we're not going with this program.
It's very strange, isn't it? Very odd. And okay, well, I think that's me. I think I've expired all of my questions for you. And if there's anything that you'd like to get off your chest or to ask us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, it was like we were beginning to talk about the those police claims, and I'm also thinking about one thing that still I don't think has been really explored is misfeasance claims against the government officials that push this whole agenda. And for example, Sajid Javid had just said at the inquiry, with the yellow card system, what's that? I haven't really heard about it. if that's meant to be a true statement, then it's completely inexcusable.
Well, it is, and I think what's interesting about that inquiry, actually, because it's not quite run the same way as a court case, so therefore you haven't got a barrister on the other side who can pick up and cross-examine and really, give them a grilling over their responses. So it's very much one-sided and almost like a gaslighting exercise, really, because it's just saying everything was brilliant. It's a great rollout. What a fantastic job everyone did, and clappy, clappy, well done. And I think that's all we're going to get out of that. Maybe, possibly, they'll look at the vaccine payment scheme, maybe the injury payment scheme, possibly give people a bit more money. Maybe that'll be their way out of it, to stop people complaining. But overall, I thought it was very poor. And I also think that despite that, it's treated like a court in the fact they take the oath. So therefore, they do commit an offence if they knowingly lie. And I think there was a lot of that, actually. I think there were, and if we can expose them and actually put a case together for lying, then that would be perjury. Now,
well, I think it's, and unfortunately, that's the only way there'll be any lessons learned. It'll be groups of people who pursue these claims. It's not going to, like you said, the inquiry for many different reasons is kind of hopeless. I mean, they framed it in a way that, the sort of opening gambit was essentially everything we did was right, and it's only a question of how much longer and harder the lockdowns should have been, and how much more vaccine should we have handed out. That's the scope of the inquiry. There's no actual investigation of any of this made any sense or not. And I know you guys are quite heavily involved in having a parallel process. Yes, the People's Vaccine Inquiry, which everything that's said there makes a lot more sense to me than the official inquiry, which is completely framed in a way not to actually get at any truth. It's framed, as you said, to really confirm that everything they did was right, which is
the good thing about the People's Vaccine Inquiry is that the experts that we have there, they're not outlandish people. They haven't come from some weird left field position. They've lived and breathed these roles their entire life. They are subject matter experts, and they can't have the wool pulled over their eyes because they've lived and breathed this for their entire lives. And yes, a lot of them are retired, but actually that's quite good because it means they've done an entire career and stayed in touch with it after they've actually retired. And they know their stuff. And they can't be blindsided by a narrative that's been sent down from above because they don't have bosses anymore. And they don't have an agenda anymore in that they don't need to stay in their positions because they've got a nice lifestyle and they're not going to lose their house or their car because they're being, struck off by the GMC. They can hold their ground. And they're the people that should be listened to.
I think you're 100% right there. You need people outside the system to be able to say something about the system. The people who are still in it and financially dependent on it, they just cannot. They are not independent, so they can't really tell the truth, I think. So,
I think it's true, and I don't think they don't know what else they would do either. You see, if they got out of the system in a younger age, it's a huge risk. If you've got a mortgage and children, and
it's impossible to do.
Yeah. So they are stuck. So we do need those people that have come out like Liz, Ros Jones, Jonathan Engler, and I mean Angus Dalgleish is amazing. I mean he's done so much work on the oncology side and is so clear and concise about where these turbo cancers are coming from and when they started to arise. Now they're clever, detailed, really competent people, and they should have been sitting in the chairs during that inquiry, the real inquiry, and they should have been given the opportunity to tell them how it is. But that's what they don't want. They do not want to know what the truth is. They would just keep their narrative goings, and it's very sad. And one thing that they don't
the
take
data's
into
very
account.
clear. I mean, you're talking about turbo cancers. All these talking heads. I remember there was one. I'm probably not going to say his name, but one of the people from the crew of Emily Maitlis and those guys, this cancer thing, it's all conspiracy theory. Well, I mean, you literally look at the chart of cancer deaths in, I think it's 15 to 44-year-olds, and there's just no question something massive is going on here that started in 2021, not 2020. And this is such an obvious signal. And it's like, how can you guys say the conspiracy theory when the data's screaming at you that there's a massive issue here? And these guys never look at any data. I don't know what how they base their opinions on anything. It's a mystery to me, but they certainly don't look at data.
This is why the ethical and the moral breakdown is huge, because how can they do that when they've got families sitting there that have lost people, or they've got someone sitting there who's lost a leg, nearly died, is still suffering, or another man that has still got heart issues and could be dying at any moment. These are real people. They're not. They treat them like statistics. That's the problem. They forget to look at them and say, no, actually, this is a human being, and this could be me. That's the way they should think. Ever for the grace of God go I. But they don't think like that. It's really worrying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just too much faith in the system, isn't it? I mean, I honestly think a lot of people have substituted Christianity. The big picture is, I think people have substituted Christianity for belief in something else, like the science or the state or who knows what, and they really start to have a kind of quasi-religious faith in these things, like the vaccine worship. I mean, there were those pictures of vaccine saves being beamed onto the Brazilian statue of Christ, and there's people actually getting into this cult of believing in the science, but it's a cult, guys, because I mean this is not what you should be worshipping, number one. But if you look at the data, which you won't do because it'll shatter your belief system, you'll see this is completely nuts. And I think there's a lot of people that now believe in the state or believe in the NHS or whatever it is, and therefore they can't be that you can't reason with them on this stuff.
No, it's probably also maybe this we've always done it this way syndrome. They can't shake it off. This is what we've been brought up with, and it must be all right because doctor gave me something once and made my knee better, and so, and that's it, It's interesting talking to a guy yesterday who lost his wife. He said he hated the NHS after that, but then his child got sick and they really, really did a good job with his child. He said, now I've changed my mind. He said, now I've got a lot of faith in the NHS, but that's the kind of, it's swinging backwards and forwards because different experiences give you a different view of the organisation, and of course it's made up with lots of different characters, but overall, they've again, already I feel like he's lost the big picture, because he's focusing on that one particular incident and not looking as a whole again as to what actually happened. Anyway, Alex, I'm really grateful for your time. It's been a real pleasure. It'd be nice to do it again sometime, and we'll keep an eye on what's happening, and there might be something else to talk about that we can really get into, because this is UKMFA. I have to keep my keep a little bit narrow. I think there's many things I'd love to talk to you about, but probably not in the UKMFA remit. But I shall keep watching you and learning from there, and. We've had some very interesting conversations.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Good. And it's lovely. Right, we'll say goodbye for now, and we'll say we'll do it again one day. Thank you.
Find out more about the UK Medical Freedom Alliance on our website. That's at ukmedfreedom.org. That's ukmedfreedom.org, where you'll find all the information you need around open letters, our campaigns, our legal template letters, and of course, even these podcasts. You'll find details of the latest one, and you'll be able to access the previous ones too via the links there. Find out more about our team. Sign up for our newsletter. It's all there, and you can even donate too.